What's up YouTube, Zero here, and today I have an absolutely amazing Umbreon EX, Darkrai EX, and Greninja deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket. In this video, I'll go over the deck build that you can see on the left hand side of the screen. I'll talk about each of these cards individually, and I'll talk about why this deck is absolutely phenomenal and one you should definitely be checking out. Before I get into it, I do want to say, as always, if you do enjoy this video, feel free to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more Pokemon TCG content. I do a bunch of other video games, so feel free to check those out as well. Be on the lookout. I have a couple of more builds already on the horizon. Umbreon EX, or Umbreon, as a Pokemon, is one of my top 3 favorite Pokemon of all time, so I'm trying to come up with as many decks for Umbreon as possible. So if you are an Umbreon fan like I am, be on the lookout for those. I also have an Espeon EX deck on the way, and I have a Gengar Sylveon EX deck on the way as well. So be on the lookout for those. But without further ado, let's talk about this deck build. Of course, I had to put Umbreon, and this was one of the first deck builds I thought of when I initially saw Umbreon EX. It just seemed perfect to pair Umbreon EX with Darkrai EX and Greninja. So first, let's talk about Umbreon EX, as it's one of the stars of the show. Umbreon EX has one attack and an ability. Let's talk about the attack first, and then I'll get into the ability. So the attack, Darkness Fang, for 2 dark energy, deals 80 damage. So it's not too bad. 2 energy for 80 damage isn't awful, but it's still not going to be a ton of damage. When you compare it to one of the most powerful, popular, and meta Pokemon right now in Solgaleo EX, Solgaleo EX for 2 energy is dealing 120 damage. So that's just a comparison. Of course, Solgaleo is a stage 2 versus Umbreon, which is a stage 1. Solgaleo also does 10 damage to itself. However, that's just a comparison of energy versus amount of damage dealt. So Umbreon is going to need a little bit of help to finish off opponents a little bit easier, because 80 isn't a ton of damage. It's decent, but nothing to write home about. However, where Umbreon EX really does shine is its ability, Dark Chase. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has damage on it to the active spot. So Umbreon EX is a free Cyrus. You don't have to worry about throwing Cyrus into this deck. I do love Cyrus, one of my favorite cards and almost a necessity in a lot of decks. You don't need Cyrus because you can have Umbreon, which acts as a Cyrus. Of course, Umbreon EX does have to be in that active spot, which does hinder it a little bit. However, with the additional Pokemon, you should be okay having Umbreon EX in that active slot to finish off your opponent's Pokemon. The reason why I do say it hinders it a little bit having to be in the active spot is I'm really thinking of a Pokemon like Pidgeot, non-EX Pidgeot, in which as long as Pidgeot is on the battlefield, you can use Drive Off, which is essentially a Sabrina. So Pidgeot can be on the playing field and just drive off an opponent's Pokemon from the active slot. Pidgeot does not have to be in the active spot. So it's interesting to see that they chose to make Umbreon EX and force it to the active spot as opposed to just being on the playing field. I would prefer that a little bit better. So it's just something to note. Umbreon EX does have to be in that active slot for you to utilize its ability. Still a great ability, and Umbreon EX is a very good Pokemon. I love using it. It has a lot of great uses and can pair really well. As I mentioned, I have a lot of decks on the way with Umbreon EX. It can pair really well with a lot of different Pokemon. So it is a great card. Just does require a little bit more than some of the other Pokemon in the game in terms of having to be in that active slot, as opposed to just utilizing its ability from the bench. Umbreon EX is going to be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Holo packs. I'll talk about Eevee in a sec, But I want to talk about the two other final evolution Pokemon, Darkrai EX, which is a basic, and then Greninja, because I want to talk about their abilities and why their abilities are fantastic when paired up with Umbreon, and why they're some of the best abilities in the game. And it really goes back to me noticing that Umbreon EX has to be in the active slot. Darkrai EX has an ability, Greninja has an ability. Both of those abilities can be activated from the bench, which does make those abilities a little bit more useful. So first, let's talk about Darkrai EX. Darkrai EX has the ability Nightmare Aura. Whenever you attach a dark energy from your energy zone to Darkrai EX, do 20 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This is a fantastic ability to have. You have Umbreon EX in that active slot getting ready to deal 80 damage. Perhaps you even utilized Umbreon's ability to draw out a weakened Pokemon from the bench to the active spot. Well, if you equip a dark energy onto Darkrai, your 80 damage now becomes 100 damage because you're adding that 20 damage from Darkrai. So 80 goes to 100. It's absolutely phenomenal to be able to throw in 20 extra damage on every hit that you can possibly have, which is absolutely awesome. Darkrai EX also has an attack, Dark Prism, for 3 energy, 2 of which are dark, 1 colorless, deals 80 damage. So Darkrai can deal 80 damage as well. And if you look at that compared to Umbreon, Umbreon's hitting for 80 for only 2 energy, Darkrai's hitting 80 for 3, so Umbreon's a little bit easier to get online in terms of energy than Darkrai, because Darkrai you have to wait, you have to build up energy, although it is dealing damage every turn that you're equipping that dark energy. So that is something to note. Darkrai EX is going to be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Dialga packs. This combination is insanely good. Both dark Pokemon, both relatively easy to get online. Of course, 3 energy isn't always as easy. However, dealing that extra 20 damage every time you're equipping energy is really nice and can really turn the tide of battle. Umbreon can pull out those weakened Pokemon from the bench if your opponent did retreat any Pokemon to the active slot. But now let's talk about why Greninja is a phenomenal pairing with these other 2 Pokemon. Greninja has been around for forever now. Greninja dropped, and you can find Greninja in the Genetic Apex Charizard packs. So Greninja's ability allows it to be put in almost every deck imaginable. Greninja's ability is Water Shuriken. Once during your turn, you may do 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that's absolutely phenomenal, and even better than Darkrai EX's ability. Greninja, as long as it's on the playing field, you don't have to worry about attaching energy to it. You just have to worry about it being present on your battlefield, can deal 20 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon. That means it can deal 20 damage to a Pokemon in the active slot. That means it can deal damage to a Pokemon on your opponent's bench. It does not matter, which is why it's absolutely phenomenal to pair up Greninja with Umbreon EX. Umbreon EX can pull out a weakened Pokemon from your opponent's bench to the active slot. Greninja can utilize Water Shuriken to guarantee that whatever Pokemon you want in that active slot is going to have damage on it. So if there's a Pokemon on the bench that you would prefer to attack, for whatever reason, perhaps it's an EX Pokemon, a powerful Pokemon that's not fully energized up, you can attack it with Water Shuriken, bring it to the active slot with Umbreon EX in that active slot and that Dark Chase ability, and attack it for 80 damage with your Umbreon EX. So now you've dealt 100 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon that you really wanted to deal damage to. Perhaps it's a basic Pokemon that you know is going to evolve into an insanely good Pokemon, such as Charmander. There may be a Charmander on your opponent's bench. You hit it with Water Shuriken, you bring it out with Umbreon EX's Dark Chase, and then you finish it off before your opponent is able to evolve into Charizard. That's one of the great combinations of Umbreon EX and Greninja. However, that's not all. Because Greninja does not require any energy and can just deal 20 damage to any Pokemon on your opponent's playing field, you can damage a Pokemon on your opponent's bench with Water Shuriken from Greninja. You can pull it to the active slot with Umbreon EX and Dark Chase. Then, as long as your Umbreon EX does have its 2 energy ready to attack, you can equip a Dark Energy onto your Darkrai, dealing an additional 20 damage, and then attack with your Umbreon EX for 80 damage. So you can deal 120 damage from that trio. If you are lucky or the battle does grind a little bit longer, you can actually have 2 Greninjas on the playing field, deal 2 Water Shurikens, so that's 40 damage, add Darkrai's Nightmare Aura for 20, so that's 60 damage, and then attack with Umbreon EX for 80 damage. So on one given turn, you can actually deal up to 140 damage. Now again, that does require getting through your deck. It requires the game to grind on a little bit. But if the game does grind on a little bit, you have the opportunity to deal 140 damage to an opposing Pokemon, which is absolutely phenomenal. I love this trio because it does handle a lot of different decks. It handles a lot of different Pokemon. And just to note, I didn't mention this earlier, I am only running Dark Energy in this deck. You can, if you choose, run it with Dark and Water Energy. However, I have had some pretty rough moments running Dual Energy where I've been bricking on a certain energy. And this deck really relies more on Dark Energy than it does Water. Greninja is a phenomenal Pokemon even when it's not attacking, so I would prefer not to brick on Dark Energy, so I just stick utilizing Dark Energy in this deck. However, if you want to run it with Dual Energy, Dark and Water, I'm not going to fault you. I know a lot of people that run a similar combination of this deck with Dark and Water, but I am only running it with Dark Energy. So now let's get back to Eevee, because you need to evolve into Umbreon EX and you need Eevee. The Eevee I love is the Eevee from the Wisdom of Sea and Sky packs, either of them, Lugia or Ho-Oh, because it has Find a Friend for 1 colorless energy. You put a random Pokemon from your deck into your hand. The most important aspect of this deck is getting the Pokemon you need. Now, the additional cards, the support cards, and all the other cards, they're nice to have, and of course you do need rare candy, but having the Pokemon such as Umbreon and Darkrai on the field, making sure you have your Greninja or your Froakie in your hand, is going to be insanely important. So what Eevee is going to do is it's going to grab a random Pokemon from your deck to your hand. So it may grab an Umbreon, so you can evolve Eevee into Umbreon on the next turn. It may grab a Darkrai, so you can put Darkrai on the bench. It may grab a Froakie, so you can put Froakie on the bench. Or it may grab a Greninja, so you're ready to evolve your Froakie when the time comes. But having Find a Friend is absolutely awesome, because this deck is at its best when it has Umbreon in that active slot, and it has at least one of the other 2 Pokemon on the bench, whether it's Darkrai EX or Greninja. Of course, it's amazing when you're able to activate both of those Pokemon at the same time, but at least having one of those Pokemon on the bench, this deck is going to do phenomenal. Umbreon attacking for 80, and then Greninja or Darkrai hitting for another 20. Hitting for 100 every turn is going to be really nice for this deck. So I love this Eevee to grab those other Pokemon out of the deck. Now, of course, you do need Froakie. What's nice about Froakie and this Froakie that I'm utilizing is from the Extra Dimensional Crisis packs. About this Froakie, or sorry, the one Froakie I'm using is from the Crisis packs, the Extra Dimensional Crisis packs, because it is a holographic card. The Froakie that you need, you can find in the Genetic Apex Charizard packs as well. So either of the packs, you can either get the holographic card from the Extra Dimensional Crisis packs, or you can get the regular one from the Genetic Apex Charizard packs. But what's nice about this Froakie is that for 1 colorless energy, it deals 10 damage for flop. So if you do get a Froakie to start the match, you can at least start dealing some damage with flop for 10, even utilizing Dark Energy. Next, couple of basics. Pokeball, you put a random basic Pokemon from your deck into your hand, and Professor's Research, you draw 2 cards. Of course, we're trying to get through our hand or through our deck as quickly as possible so we can implement our strategy. Next, Rare Candy. Of course, I don't have a Frogadier in this deck. I'm relying on Rare Candy. For those of you who don't know what Rare Candy does, if Froakie is on the playing field, so Rare Candy applies to every stage 2 Pokemon, but in this case it's going to be Froakie Greninja. If you have a Froakie on the playing field and you have a Greninja and Rare Candy in your hand, as long as Froakie has been on the playing field for at least 1 turn, you can utilize Rare Candy to evolve into Greninja, skipping your stage 1 or your Frogadier. So it's really awesome. You don't have to worry about waiting a turn to evolve into Frogadier and then another turn for Greninja. You just evolve right into Greninja. So this is going to allow you to get your Greninja online more quickly. Rare Candy can be found in the Celestial Guardians packs. Next, let's talk about Dark Pendant. I love Dark Pendant. Dark Pendant is phenomenal. It really punishes your opponent for attacking your Dark type Pokemon. So Dark Pendant, if the Dark Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, your opponent reveals a random card from their hand and shuffles it into their deck. That's pretty awesome. It's really punishing your opponent for attacking you. So whether you have Dark Pendant on Darkrai EX or Umbreon EX, if your opponent attacks you, you now take a random card from their hand and it gets shuffled back into their deck. This can really mess up your opponent's strategy, really taking a card that he or she may need and throwing it right back into the deck. I've known a couple of opponents that I've faced have specifically not attacked me because I have Dark Pendant. They were fearing that I was going to take a card from their hand that they needed, such as an evolution, and throw it back into their deck. So they chose not to attack me. So Dark Pendant not only is going to take a card from your opponent's hand and throw it back into the deck, but it could also scare your opponent from attacking, which is absolutely awesome. Dark Pendant can be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Ho-Oh packs. Last but not least, Eevee Bag. I love Eevee Bag for almost every Evolution deck. Eevee Bag, you actually get to choose one of 2 options. Either first, you can choose to deal an additional 10 damage for any of your Evolutions, or you can choose to heal 20 damage for any of your Evolutions. So if Umbreon has taken a little bit of damage, you can utilize Eevee Bag to heal it up 20 HP. You can actually utilize both Eevee Bags on one turn, so you can heal it up 40 HP if you so chose in one turn if you have both Eevee Bags in your hand. Or if you wanted to deal additional damage, an additional 10 damage, or if you have both Eevee Bags 20 damage, you can utilize both Eevee Bags to do so. So if you're lucky enough, 2 Greninjas on the playing field, that's 40 damage. Equip a Dark Energy onto Darkrai, that's 60 damage. 2 Eevee Bags, that's 80 damage. Umbreon EX attacking with Darkness Fang, another 80 damage. That's 160 damage that you can deal in one turn. Of course, that's in a perfect world, but you do or could deal 160 damage if you're in a perfect world. But Eevee Bag is great because you can see how the match is going and play it by ear and utilize Eevee Bag that way. Eevee Bag is going to be found in the Eevee Grove packs. So let me know what you think of this deck in the comments section. I really love this deck. I love Umbreon, and I'm glad I could find an amazing deck with it. But let me know in the comments section what you think. what Pokemon would you switch out in this deck to make it even better? I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, peace.